Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry.
This week on the podcast, we are joined by Ryan McDevitt, co-founder and CEO of Benchmark Space Systems. Ryan's dream of working in the space sector was already set in motion in his early childhood, with his first ever drawings being of spacecraft and astronauts orbiting the moon. From here, Ryan followed his passion through education before founding Benchmark, who are a growing space startup reimagining systems for a new class of spacecraft. They are combining mission heritage, best-in-class propulsion products with advanced control products and services, delivering bundled in-space mobility solutions with significant cost and capability benefits.
Really excited to have you on here. I've been looking into Benchmark Space Systems, and the work you guys are doing is just incredible. The services that you're providing, I think the value that you're adding to so many of these companies in the sector is just so kind of great. Couple of days looking into you guys.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're having fun and hopefully helping our customers out.
Oh, I bet you are. I think you definitely are by the sounds of things. It's amazing. Well, it's a very long story to go through, very long and interesting one. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk the early days of Ryan McDevitt. So talk us through kind of where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, and then how you found your way into your early career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Vermont, so not necessarily a hotbed of aerospace, but even in my earliest days, I always wanted to work in aerospace. All my earliest drawings are space shuttles and people orbiting the moon and different kinds of spacecraft that I would draw. So that was my passion early on. And that drove me to selecting a college. I went to Worcester Polytech, where Robert Goddard had done some of his first rocketry experiments and done some of the early work. So that was exciting. It was also the college that my grandfather had gone to. So I had a nice kind of dual legacy there, things that I wanted to be interested and involved in. So went to school there and then took a slight detour, went and worked at Pratt & Whitney doing jet engine design. So still aerospace, but not quite where I wanted to be. So I did that for a few years. And then I had the opportunity to go back to Vermont, where I did my PhD at the University of Vermont working on micropropulsion, which was fascinating, but also at the time that I started, completely useless. There were no satellites that really needed that micropropulsion. It was really kind of hypothetical and in the future. And then while I was there working on it, you really had this CubeSat revolution, right? You had all the companies that were coming out and using the CubeSats and turning them into real business models that were exciting and interesting. And suddenly it was like, aha, this micropropulsion, this might have some legs. There might actually be something here. And that turned into Benchmark.
Oh, wow. It's great. It's so great to hear about this. I love this bit of the podcast where people kind of talk about the early days and how they just loved space and how they always knew. And it's always the drawings and the little stories when they were really young. And it's really interesting to hear about your PhD, because I know that the kind of research that you did is really key in kind of what Benchmarks are currently doing at the moment. So I think maybe now what would be good if you could maybe tell the listeners a bit about what Benchmark Space Systems are doing, kind of what their place is in the sector, and where you see the company going in the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with what we're doing and then we'll take a detour back a little bit. So what we do today, what we really are focused on is how can we make our customers' lives easier by helping them move around in space. There are lots of ways to do that. There's the onboard propulsion, the orbital transfer vehicles, the guidance navigation control, all these different pieces. And Benchmark wants to be partners with customers to help them out. There's so much stuff going up. There's so many new companies. There are all these exciting and interesting, new founders bringing great new ideas. And solving that challenge of moving stuff around in space is probably not what gets them excited and out of bed in the morning. And so Benchmark wants to be the person who can do that. So I'm talking about, that's a little bit about what we do in the future state. If you look back, what that means, how we got into this is doing chemical propulsion. That was our first foray into the market. And like you mentioned, when we first got into this, a lot of it was based on my PhD research. So my co-founder, Matt Shea, and I, we started the company. I was more on the R&D and development side of things. Matt's expertise is taking technology out of the lab and turning it into a product. And so we built a team around those kind of complementary skills. In 2018, we added Chris Corella, the business development side, former engineer, who could take those skills and apply them to the market. And between the three of us, we were able to really turn that into an engine for growth, right? Building on those first seeds of the research. But really, at this point, I would say a lot of what we do. I appreciate you giving me some credit and saying, hey, the PhD research. But what makes me most excited is that a lot of what we do these days is the amazing work of the team that we have here. That they are leaps and bounds beyond what I was doing. We are so far beyond that, and that's really gratifying for me. It's not, sometimes I'm wistful about all the work that I did, and that's not, what we're doing as much anymore. But then I look around at the amazing team and I go, no, this is why I did this. This is great.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, you've got to give credit to the team. It sounds like you've got a really great company culture. I watched a couple of the videos of you guys all talking. Everyone just seems so passionate. Seems like you've got a really great team. And I guess the work you're all doing, it's so key. As you said, you're making people's lives easier. You're getting these things in their hands quicker, and it's more cost effective. And it's really just, I think it's such an invaluable service to just empower the endless growth that we're seeing in the space sector. And that kind of brings me on to my next question. So now you're kind of you've embedded yourself into the industry, and you've made this name for yourself. What is it that you love most about the space sector?
I think there are two parts that really get me excited. So one is people that work in this sector are passionate for the work that they do. You alluded to it earlier, the people that you've talked to through this podcast series and the work that you're doing. But I see this every day. And I think it just comes down to space is hard, right? Everyone says this, but it's true. There are a lot easier ways to make a buck. If that was your only interest, that's what you wouldn't do this. But if you do this, it's because you're passionate, whether you're, and that goes to everyone, whether you're, an engineer or an accountant or a lawyer, whatever it is, you're bringing something to the table. There's an energy and an enthusiasm. And so when you talk about company culture, I think, we work hard at it, but it's also somewhat easy because we are united through a common purpose and passion for what we do. And that's really exciting for me. And then the second part of what makes this sector so interesting for me is people know how to have fun. And they know how to enjoy what they're doing, to take a step back and say, hey, we're working together to do really hard things, but we also can relax and get excited. And I'll just mention, so last month we had an event where our team, which is remote, we have people in the UK, we have people in California, Vermont, 13 different states, Canada. We had an event where we all went axe throwing on the same day. So we're talking 5 different time zones, 50 plus people trying to organize this. And then when you look through all of the pictures, right, these are all people who got up in the morning, solved difficult engineering problems, did all this work. And then at lunchtime, we go on and we go have this fun thing. And people can make that transition. And that's something that I don't always see from, with my friends that work in other industries. Like they're burned out all the time. They're miserable, even when they're out of work. Like that's not how it feels here. People can have fun as well.
Yeah, completely. I completely agree with you. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, obviously space is hard, but it's so fun. And the passion, as you said, it kind of unites people across the industry. And I think that is one of the really big factors that is kind of working to make the sector more accessible, is that people want to kind of share this passion that they have for such an incredible sector and thing that we're involved in. And yeah, it's really great to kind of hear your personal take on this, because, one of the main really reasons that we started this podcast is to make the industry accessible for everyone, to kind of demystify it, show people, it's not all astronauts and scientists, there's so much you can do. And a really hot topic across the industry right now, as I'm sure you're aware, is the constant battle for good talent, and what more we can be doing to make sure that the companies in the sector are getting the skills that they need to kind of thrive and to keep moving and progressing. We personally at EVONA, as we know that a lot of people in the industry feel this way, believe that more needs to be done to impact change at a much younger level, with young children and people across STEM, to make sure that we can sustain the growth of the sector in the years to come. From your experience and point of view, what do you feel that we should be doing differently across the industry, kind of at STEM level, to impact this change now and for the future generations?
Yeah, it's certainly a hot topic, like you said, and a thing
Yeah.
that we think about a lot. I was just at a conference earlier this week that was talking about what is the future of education. I was invited to talk about jobs of the future and what people need. So this is really top of mind for me because I was just doing this week, and I think it ultimately comes down to a couple of items. And I heard similar things from the educators that I was speaking with. One of which is the really rigid focus, and this is certainly true in the States, and I know it's true in other places as well. This really rigid focus on standardized testing and really discipline specific testing in a way that's so not how real life works. So being, our best engineers here are not necessarily the people who got the highest standardized test score or the best grades, right? They're the people who can synthesize information across a variety of disciplines, bring them together and integrate that and communicate that. So if you looked at any individual standardized test, maybe they're not the best at it, but really it's the aggregate of them that kind of pulls it together. And so what does that mean, or how would I go about kind of changing that? I think people do a good job. They try with the project-based learning and things like that, but it's the projects and the communication, the team-based stuff like that really is fundamental. So I think continuing to encourage that. That can be challenging. There's like this prevailing headwind of, okay, great, we're going to do projects. Oh, until we have to start teaching for the standardized test, and then everything goes to this other model. So if I could wave a magic wand, that would be my probably the first thing. I think the other thing, and I think that one's been talked about a lot, but you asked the question, so I gave you, my feedback. But the other thing that I don't hear as much, but I hear in some corners is engineering is as much about failure as it is about success. Science is definitely that way, but engineering is as much about failure. And so, but we don't set our academic curriculum up like that. We don't set our, kind of teaching paradigm up like that, right? Did you get an A or did you get an F, right? Like that's how we think about these things. And that it's so different once you get out and you're actually doing these things. I want to see people who are resilient, right? They know how to take a failure, learn their lesson, and turn it into a success down the road. And we don't always develop that resilience through what we do. So those are the two things that I think are kind of most critical, is like the rigid classification of the education or knowledge into like these discrete tests. I'm going to test you for math. I'm going to test you for reading. That's just not how it works. And then the resilience, and how can we improve that?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. You've made some really great points there that I think a lot of people can learn from. But I think, as you said, resilience is so key, and it's no matter what is going on, no matter what kind of deterrents, obstacles, if your testament, everyone we've had on this podcast stands as testament. You have to be resilient. It's never an easy path. I think, especially when you're making such big change in such an enormous and complex sector, really, let's be honest, as space. But I think, like you said, it's so true. You have to learn from these mistakes, because you're going to have failures and you're going to have successes, because, I think that's that's something that people don't really highlight. I think a lot of people tend to really promote their successes and their achievements and kind of the end product, but we don't often see the work, the grind, the sacrifices, and the failures really that kind of led up to that. I'd be very interested to hear on the topic. Failure is a strong word, but what would you, kind of in your career so far, what would you consider to be your biggest failure? What did you learn from that? And then on the other side of the fence, what would you consider your biggest career achievement to date would be?
Sure. I'll start with the failure so we can end on a high note. So
yeah,
the biggest failure, I'll give it a brief story and then I'll explain. So we started the company, my co-founder and I, in 2017. We hired our first employees, and we had a little bit of grant funding, and we had this investment lined up. So we hired people, we got a location, we started moving forward. And for various reasons, the investment fell through at kind of the 11th hour. And we came very close to going out of business, to the point that my first couple of employees, I had to have a meeting on the Friday before Christmas and say, I have, good news and bad news. The good news is here's your Christmas bonus, and the bad news is we're not coming back after Christmas. No, of course, I didn't say it
God.
that flip, but that's how it felt, right? That's how it felt to me. Is that what I was saying? Now, what ended up happening is we did end up getting an investment, and we pulled it together, and we came back after Christmas, and thankfully we're still here and growing and excited. And the failure isn't the almost running out of money, because if you're going to do this job, you're going to almost run out of money a lot. And sometimes you will run out of money, and that's part of the process. But the failure for me was I kept waiting to tell them that this was bad, because I kept thinking I was going to be able to save the day. That I don't need to stress them. I don't need to make them worry. I'm going to save this. It's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of this. And then by the time I told them, it was like, not, hey, you've got a month to figure out what you're doing next. It was, hey, this is your last day, because this is everyone's last day, because we're shutting down. And what I've taken away from that, and hopefully, my team sees this and feels this way, and people that come join us, is transparency, which seems really obvious, but that was a painful way to learn. And I thought I did it with the best of intentions, this idea of like, I'm going to protect them. But they're adults. We're all adults here. They knew what they were getting themselves into. And I could have handled that better in a way that wasn't such a roller coaster for them. And so I try and do that for new employees. So that was my lowest moment, right? I mean, going home on a Friday before Christmas. It's supposed to be a happy time of year, and I was miserable. Turned it around, but that I learned, let's not put myself in that situation again. Because what I felt most bad about was, was how it was going to make them feel. Them having to go home and tell their family, hey, this didn't work out, and they didn't tell me until the last possible second.
Yeah. Well, it turned into a bit of a Christmas miracle in the end, I guess.
It was a Christmas miracle. It turned around, and like I said, I mean that from that low point, we've been able to bring it back strong. And hopefully, the lesson that I learned, I don't have to relearn, and I can help others. So on the other side of the coin, the positive side, again, I'll tell a brief story. So I was, as I was wrapping up my PhD and immediately following my PhD, I was teaching at UVM. I was teaching a couple of classes, space systems engineering, rocket propulsion, et cetera. So I was having a lot of people that were coming to my classes that were aerospace inclined or interested in getting into the industry. And as we were wrapping up, every year or every semester, they would come and ask for letters of recommendation. And every time it was like, oh, cool, where are you applying? Where are you thinking about going? So like, well, I wanted to stay in Vermont, but there are no jobs here doing what I want to do. So I'm moving to California, I'm moving to Colorado, I'm moving to Florida, et cetera. And some people, that's what they want to do. They love that. But others were reluctant. Hey, I have to move away if I want to do this. And so part of the reason that I started Benchmark, part of the reason I started Benchmark in Burlington, Vermont, again, not a hotbed of aerospace at the time, is that I wanted to be able to build a company that could encourage and attract people that wanted to be here to be able to stay here. So my greatest success was the day that we launched our first system, and I was able to look around the room at people. Some of them were my former students. Some of them were people that I met through the network. Some of them were people who were native Vermonters who had moved away and moved back because there was finally a place that was doing the work that they wanted to do. And I got to watch the look on their faces as something that they built with their bare hands got launched into space. That was really gratifying, because it was the culmination of that phase of the company. It was going from nothing, no company here, no industry, to, hey, we have hardware in space. We did it together, and we did it in a place that we wanted to be. That was really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great to hear. That must have been such an amazing feeling to kind of use your position to help other people that I'm sure you saw a bit of yourself in, that you'd been in that position to kind of give them, if you were teaching at the time, it's potentially their first steps into their dream industry that you've allowed them to do here, which is what an amazing tool that you've given people. And this is something else I'd kind of like to dive into a bit more with you. Obviously that is a huge service that you've given to people, that these people that have big dreams but maybe don't know how to follow them, having to move around, which maybe, as you said, they didn't want to. You obviously really bridged that gap there for them. But for you personally, when you were kind of finding your way into the industry, we've touched on the story a bit. What would you say across your journey were the best kind of resources that you identified and utilized, whether that's, courses, programs, mentors, or just anything that helped you transition?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that come to mind. So the first is I'd recommend everyone take some kind of space systems engineering class, no matter what level of interest, even if that's not exactly where you want to end up. I think back that was really the class for me. I took it as an undergrad that opened my eyes to what it actually means. And so a lot of times these classes are taught, when I taught it and when I took it, they're taught, hey, students, you're going to design a mission, you're going to pick a place, you're going to go through the process, you're going to learn everything. And it's fun, it's interesting, but it also really helps to open your eyes to like, what does this actually mean to do? So, and there are all sorts of online, MIT hit through their open courseware, like there's a space systems engineering course that you can do. NASA puts out a space systems engineering course. So if anyone's interested, I would recommend check those things out. You don't have to follow along step by step, but just see what that process looks like. That's super fun. And the complement to that is, SMAD, the spacecraft mission analysis and design handbook, which is looks like a reference book. It's a big fat textbook. However, if you actually go through it, it is very accessible in the sense that it's literally helping you think about step by step by step, how would you go about building a mission and design. So that's one specific thing. I'll throw it in here and people might laugh, but Kerbal Space Program, I'm a little bit older, so it wasn't so much for me. But when I look around at like my son who's 11 and his friends, like that's a way for them to get in. Colleges, can do the same thing. So having a really accessible, fun, interesting way to experience the space industry, but also that, has some real underlying physics and engineering built into it. It's a silly one, but it's a real one. I mean, there are definitely a lot of people that work here at Benchmark. Like that was some of their first introduction to what it means to put things into space. And then the last one is that this is pretty specific to the US, but NASA has a variety of programs that they put out. And I was fortunate to be, the space grant and which is a national foundation, national space grant, but then they have state level. So I was a Vermont Space Grant Fellow, which meant I got to connect with all sorts of people at NASA and throughout the industry. And there are opportunities out there in every state to participate in that type of thing. So that was a great entry point, helped me understand what it would take to start this company, get familiar with things. So a couple of different ways I got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some really great advice and no silly suggestions at all. I don't think. I think, you never know what's going to stick. And there's so many amazing resources across the industry to utilize. And I think the point you're making is completely right. Just go for it. Just dive right in, take a class that you maybe never thought you would, and it could completely change the trajectory of your life. I think that's some really great tangible advice that people can kind of go away and act on directly. So that's some great resources, programs and stuff. What advice would you give to someone? Obviously, we've kind of touched on this a bit in the previous question, but I'd like to dive a bit further into it. So what advice would you give to someone from either a technical or a non-technical background who's looking to enter the space sector either in 2022 or beyond?
I think the future of space, and I think EVONA and you agree with this, but I think the future of space is about accessibility. And so what I would say is thinking about how to become an ambassador for what we do and what does that mean. And so, if you're more on the engineering side, thinking about communication skills, digital communication, written communication, social media communication, and being out there in front of things. I'm always impressed with people who are using their professional social media tools to really help educate and elevate the industry and the people around them. A lot of times social media can kind of devolve into the self-obsessed. And so the people who take that and do the opposite and use their platform to help bring people up, I think is huge. And I think that needs to grow, because if we're going to attract the kind of talent, if we're going to attract the kind of capital, and if we're going to attract the kind of interest that the industry is going to need to grow at the rates that we want, we need to think about how to make this feel more accessible for people. And then on the non-technical side, a lot of people are naturally going to maybe gravitate toward that part of it. So I would say thinking about the ambassadorship on that side of it is thinking about how to bring in enough of the technical so that you can translate it and make it easier for people. And so the balance of those two things, making the engineers or technical people better at their communication skills, and then on the other side, making sure that people are thinking about and bringing that passion, energy, excitement, and capability, but layering in enough of the technologies that they can translate, that they can bring that together. I think that ambassadorship is the biggest thing I think is going to be a transformational over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that these ambassadors and these mentors, they kind of become the face of the industry for these people that are looking to enter it. And it just makes it so much more accessible. They're demystifying it. They're breaking it down for people. They're helping them to understand, because as you said, they want to guide people. They want to kind of educate and elevate people to follow in their footsteps, because, they probably had a hard time unless it landed in their lap, which I don't think is very common in the industry. I think mentors, I think this is really common across all of the episodes that we've had on this podcast. Everyone is in agreement, including myself. And speaking for EVONA, these mentors and these ambassadors, whether it's a technical or a non-technical role, it's just enormous. And this, as you said, is what's making it accessible. It's what's bridging the gap, and it's what's empowering growth in both the technical and the non-technical sides of the sector, which I think is something that's really, really exciting to kind of watch. Which it's happening at the moment. It's happening so fast, and I think it's that's something that personally, from within inside the sector, I'm really enjoying watching that kind of develop. Right. So Ryan, we've spoken about your story. We've spoken about kind of accessibility, how we can inspire people to get involved in the industry. To round off, kind of looking forward, kind of summing up what we've spoken about so far, I would love to know what your thoughts are on kind of the current status of the space sector, and I guess kind of more specifically your corner of the space sector, and how do you see this evolving over the next kind of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we're going to see is a continued push to make the underlying infrastructure of space, the ways that you move around, the ways that you build spacecraft, the ways that you get to space, those are going to get easier and become less of the focus of what we do. And then the value that those things create is going to become more of a focus. And we're going to see I think that's going to have a lot of impacts. I think there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. And we've already started to see this, but I think it's going to continue to grow. Data visualization, thinking about ways to process all the information that's being created, thinking about expanding the sphere of influence of what we do on Earth, right? So we're talking about private space stations, lunar colonies, these different pieces. And right now, so much of the emphasis is on infrastructure. How do you build the satellites? How do you build the propulsion? How do you build these different things? And what we want to see, but I do see it happening, is let's focus less on that. Let's solve those challenges so that we can enable the next generation of exciting entrepreneurs and inventors and innovators to do what they want to do. The best analogy that I have, and it's imperfect, but it's the best one that I have, is when they invented the iPhone, the purpose was not to enable apps, but once the iPhone was invented, suddenly you have this new ecosystem, and no one has to worry about inventing an iPhone every time they want to build an app. So Benchmark wants to be supporting, let's collectively build, the platform, the iPhone, so that the people who can go build the apps are enabled to do it. And that's where I see the industry going.
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. It's such exciting work that you guys are involved in. And I'm really excited to kind of see, you've already made such enormous strides, but the way that you're kind of improving in space mobility for the companies that you're working with is just so vital in the way that you're reducing cost, you're making things more efficient. And I know that you have a big focus on kind of sustainability as well. You're using non-toxic propellants, am I right? Which I'm sure sustainability is such a huge topic, not just in space, but across the entire world. It's such a huge topic. And I think that is really key that you guys are focusing on that, because that's something that, sustainability in the space sector is a really hot topic right now. And there is obviously more that we need to be doing for more sustainable ways of doing what we do, because if we want to continue progressing and thriving in the way that we are, we need to start thinking about how we can make this work long term. And I think, you guys are really at the forefront of that. And I think it's just so great to watch the company grow. Still quite a relatively young company. Were you 2017, 2018 were you launched?
In 2017, we were founded, really get started in 2018. So about a little over 5 years, but 4 years of real meaningful progress.
Yeah, well, still a very short time so far, and can't wait to see how the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years turn out, and the kind of the work you guys churn out in that time.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. That concludes our podcast. Really appreciate you coming on here. Really enjoyed speaking to you. I know you must be very busy over there, so really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. This is fun.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure. Thank you so much.